So first of all, we were asking people to just tune in through the chat to see what museum you're tuning in from, and if your site is collecting COVES data or any other sort of data independently. So if it's observations, anecdotal information, um, anything relating to data, that's something useful to collect. So feel free to put that in the chat as we get our conversation going. All right, let's get started once again. So thanks for sharing. I'm seeing some comments coming in from people from all over. Today, we'll be learning how to understand your visitors through data-driven insights with COVES. We're going to try to keep it general to see just in case your site collects data independently, so it can be applicable to both situations. Before we fully dive in, let's start with some introductions, and I'll pass it off to Kim. Let's do this one more time.
Hi, everyone, and thanks so much for joining us for round two today. As Maria just said, my name is Kim Awa, and I'm one of the research and evaluation specialists here at Art Bridges. I'm really excited to talk to you today about understanding your visitorship at museums, but also looking at these things nationally, what these patterns are showing us, and also the specificity of how you can apply that to your own museum. So, with that, I'm going to pass it back over to Maria.
Of course. Thanks, Kim. And I'm the newest addition to the Art Bridges evaluation team. I'm a research and evaluation specialist, fully focusing on COVES. So my background is in social science research. It's in museum studies, museum evaluation, exhibit development. So I'm bringing in a lot of hats to the ring here, and a lot of different perspectives to consider. But more than anything, I'm just really excited about the relationship building and the partnership aspect that my role entails. So I'm always looking forward to getting to know sites and just providing any sort of support that we can throughout the COVES process, whether they're just starting out or whether we're reviewing renewals or annual reports. So, for today, we're going to focus on a few key things. First of all, our main takeaway is to help you understand how data, whether it's gathered with COVES, whether you're collecting data independently, essentially how data can strengthen your audience research. In order to do that, we'll be looking specifically at local and tourist visitors and why they decided to visit. We chose these metrics just because they're common audiences that museums want to know more about, and it can inform lots of programming, exhibition planning, grant writing, all that sort of stuff. So Kim will be presenting really valuable data coming from the Coves Art Bridges aggregate. And when we're saying aggregate, we're referring to data that's coming from the 92 museums that are part of Coves Art Bridges. And then we'll show you how you can compare this aggregate data to your site-specific data. And in the end, I'll just be showing you more practical ways on how you can use your COVES data, how you can use your COVES dashboard, as well as just any general data dashboard to help you get a more nuanced view of the audience. Now, to help you understand your data and make comparisons, you first need to know what types of data you can gather. So usually museums collect data through follow-up surveys sent through emails, anecdotal data compiled by guest services, compiled by ticketing or admission systems, or intercept surveys, which is what COVES is. There are a lot of other ways that you can collect data. So think about interviews, observations, focus groups, but the ones that we had showed on screen are typically the most common ones when it comes to museums. And I also just want to highlight before I move on to fully diving into coves that just depending on the method that you choose, it will end up shaping the data that you collect and what you'll be able to understand from your visitors. So, for example, if you choose to do observations with visitors in your galleries, you're gonna be able to find out what visitors are seeing, how much time they're spending in specific sections of your museum, what things they're interacting in. But what observations won't let you know is the why behind those actions. And this is where surveys and interviews can be super, super helpful to get to that why. Okay, now to talk more specifically about COVES, or to just introduce that acronym as Collaboration for Ongoing Visitor Experience Studies. COVES is a survey where visitors are intercepted at the very end of their museum visit. Steph, could we just go one slide back? Thank you. So you'll collect data on who visits. This includes demographic information as well as any other descriptors. So for example, repeat visitors, groups with family or groups with children, those sorts of things. You'll be able to understand through COVES why people are visiting your museum, what they see or do during their visit, as well as how they feel about their visit overall. Now, when I explain COVES, and here we can head to the next slide, it's important to understand that we work in partnership with the Museum of Science in Boston to help set up COVES at new sites, to support existing sites. Museum of Science in Boston, they focus more on the science institution side of things, and then COVES Art Bridges provide support for art museums, as well as a few additional perks that we always like to shout out. So first of all, you'll be joining a network of 92 Coves Art Bridges sites, collecting data, and these span art museums from varying sizes across geographic locations, as you can see on this map, showing different types of art and trying to cater to different types of audiences. And these responses make up about 31,000 insights from visitors, which is a huge data set. Another thing that Art Bridges support includes is this really nice 5,000 evaluation award. And as long as you hit your data targets for your year, you'll be able to receive and renew that $5,000 award. We also waive yearly membership fees. We provide data collection training. We offer custom reports and insights. And something that's really useful to sites in the sites that I've been talking to recently is just providing that ongoing evaluation support. So not only being able to meet to discuss your annual COVES report, to discuss data collection strategies and any other help that you might need to implement COVES and use COVES to its maximum potential. So before I hand it off to Kim, I do want to highlight the different ways that you can look at and analyze your data. And this is some stats 101 terms, so please bear with us. But we just think it's important, at least when we're looking at our analyses. So essentially, there are two ways that you can look at your data using descriptive statistics and inferential statistics. When you use descriptive statistics, we're looking at the percentages and the numbers. So what does my audience look like? And then we can dive into comparison. So how does that compare to that national aggregate? And so descriptive statistics describe the data set that we're looking at. And I'll be diving more into this in the latter half of the presentation, just so you know where these terms kind of fit into what Kim and I are talking about. When you use inferential statistics, sorry, not yet, you're running statistical tests for patterns, for differences, and any notable shifts. So it can differentiate what might just be a coincidence or what might be a good guess over like what the data and percentages are telling you. But when you're using inferential statistics, those statistical tests tell you what's significant or not. So the numbers are essentially backing up your assumptions. And this is what some of Kim will be showing you today. Okay. And I'll pass it over to Kim.
Awesome. So thanks so much, Maria, for that great overview. And before I jump in, I just want to acknowledge that I know everyone here is probably coming in with a very different level of comfort when it comes to data. So some of you perhaps work with data all the time. Some of you might be just getting started, and some of you may be somewhere in between. So all of that is completely okay. And no matter where you're personally at, your team is at, whether you have a full data team, you're already collecting data, or you're just beginning to think about data, the core questions that we're going to be talking about today are pretty common and similar. So things like, who are your visitors? At the end of the day, even deciding to collect data really reflects a shared institutional goal, which is wanting to have a deeper understanding of the people coming through your doors. And so there's a lot of different ways, like Maria just talked about, to approach these kinds of questions museums are asking. And what I'm going to walk you through today is really just one example of how data can help us better understand the composition of these visitors. So next slide. So the first step in really understanding your visitorship is simply knowing who is even walking through the door. So most of you here who are joining from museums or other institutions, you probably already have a sense of the count of your overall attendance, whether that's your annual visitors or programmatic visitors. But beyond those numbers, some of you might also know things like the percentage or the breakdown of your audience if they are local visitors or tourists. And that kind of information gives you a really important foundation to help you design programs and experiences that speak to the very people who are showing up. And it helps you build towards a stronger community and a stronger relevance with those relationships. So, for example, you might notice certain programs growing in attendance, or you may notice that others that used to be popular are starting to dwindle a little bit. So when you know who your visitors are, it becomes a lot easier to make sense of those shifts and respond to them with confidence. Next slide. So with that in mind, today I'm going to talk about three key questions. Again, as Maria mentioned, all through the lens of national patterns. So first, is the ratio of local and tourist visitors stable, or has it shifted over the past 3 years? And then the next two questions get at what's actually bringing people through the door. Are motivations for local visitors staying the same or are they changing? And the same perspective with tourists, stable or shifting. So my hope is that even though I'm sharing a national level finding, you can use these as benchmarks for your own data if you have those metrics available. And by having those comparison points, and again, as Maria touched on earlier, between your museum and the broader national pattern, it really helps you be able to start to see what's unique about your audience. And then from there, you're able to really zoom in on the granularity of who's showing up and the whys. So next slide. So when we look at the national aggregate here in the circle chart right there, we see that overall about 57% of visitors are local and 43% are tourists. And if we break that down across the past 3 years in those three rows below, those percentages stay pretty consistent. There's not much movement between local and tourist visitors over the past 3 years. Now, these percentages on their own are simply descriptive. So they tell us what's happening and they give us visual cues on these emergent patterns. But I wanted to take it one step further and test whether these patterns are actually stable from a statistical standpoint. So I ran a chi-square, which is an inferential method to be able to determine are these fluctuations random or meaningful. And as you can see, what the results showed is that yes, these patterns are stable. We're not really seeing meaningful shifts in the balance between local and tourist visitors over the past 3 years. But again, I do want to emphasize that this is a national snapshot. So your specific museum may be experiencing something quite different, and that's where your own data becomes extremely important. We can go to the next slide. So now that we have a solid sense of who's showing up, at least at the national level, we can then start to look at what's actually motivating people to visit these art museums in the first place. And so understanding these motivations, as I touched on earlier, it helps provide insights that then become actionable. It helps give you something concrete to anchor to and to design around and make decisions from. So next slide. Again, I just want to remind that what we're looking at here is a national snapshot of what's motivating locals versus tourists to visit art museums. And these motivations are pulled directly from John Falk's work that was inspired for the core motivations in the COVES survey. The lighter purple are tourists and the darker purple is locals. And again, these percentages are descriptive, but they help show that the patterns and the stability or lack of stability as a great starting point to visually notice these trends. And similarly, before, I ran another inferential test just to see and understand whether these differences are actually meaningful from a statistical standpoint. Because visually, we can see, yes, there are these stark fluctuations between locals and tourists, but is there meaning behind that? And as you can see, the results show that motivations differ between locals and tourists on almost every measure, with one exception, which is it was recommended to me, which really didn't meaningfully vary between the two groups. And some of this aligns with really what we might expect. So, for example, tourists being motivated by something to do while visiting the area makes intuitive sense, and that's the largest light purple bar. But what's especially interesting, I think, for tourists is the second strongest motivation is the desire to learn something new, followed by wanting to spend time together as a group or family. And when we look at locals, these patterns shift slightly. So their top motivation is spending time together, followed by learning something new. Again, this is just an aggregate of all of the data that's been collected in COVES. So across both groups, these core motivations are actually quite similar. They're centered around learning and social connection. The differences are really in the strength or the robustness of these motivations across the groups. Next slide. So really, to summarize what we're seeing at that national level, local visitors are primarily coming for how the museum makes them feel. That shows up through things like the social connection and sense of community, wanting to spend time together. Tourists, on the other hand, are of course driven by the location. It's something to do while they're visiting the area, which again makes intuitive sense, but they're also looking for connection once they arrive. And I want to say that that's an important distinction. So even if the initial draw is tied to their travel plans, their itinerary, museums still have the opportunity to create a strong first impression that signals to all visitors that this is a place where you can feel engaged, connected, and welcome. And another key takeaway is that both groups are equally motivated by learning. So if the learning experience is dampened in any way, whether through programming or marketing, exhibitions, that affects both audiences. So now that we have a sense of how local and tourist motivations differ broadly at a national level, the next natural question is, are these patterns changing over time? And for your own museum, you may already have that answer in your head. But just broadly speaking, I wanted to start by looking at the local visitorship motivations over the past 3 years, so since 2023. So looking at this chart, it's a breakdown by the first columns 2023, 2024, and then followed by 2025. We can see the distribution of local visitor motivations in this chart. And again, this is a descriptive view, so it's showing us what's happening on the surface, but I really want us to focus on whether any of these changes are meaningful across those 3 years. So again, I tested this shift using an inferential approach, and results show that one motivation in particular is standing out. Specifically, feeling connected to the community has significantly increased. So about a 16% relative increase from 7.8% to 9.1%. Now, at first glance, I understand that this may seem like a small change, but this is really where the inferential stats approach matter, because this increase isn't just noise or random fluctuation. What this is telling us is that there's a meaningful shift and it is distinct from the other motivations. What this also suggests is that local visitors are increasingly motivated by the desire to feel connected to their community, specifically over these past 3 years. So, from a practical standpoint, uh, this points to an opportunity for community-centered programming, which may be especially well positioned right now to grow that local engagement. Your museum, though, may be seeing something different in your own data. So again, I really want to emphasize to use these national patterns as an anchor point to identify the uniqueness of your own visitorship. So with that in mind, I want to take a look at then how these trends compare to tourists over the past 3 years as well. So next slide. So similar to the local audiences in the previous slide, this chart showing the distribution breakdown of these tourist motivations over the past 3 years. And again, this is a descriptive view. So it's helping us visually spot general patterns. But just like before, I also ran an inferential test to see whether any of these changes are meaningful over the past few years. And results show that for tourists, there's a unique emergent pattern compared to locals. And so we can see that since 2023, there's about a 33% relative increase in the motivation to find peace. And at the same time, the desire to relax has increased in 2024, but then there's this interesting drop back down to similar levels from 2023. So there's this almost curvilinear component. I also want to briefly note that statistically, we typically use a threshold of about 5% probability when determining whether something is meaningfully different or not. But even outside of that threshold, it can still be useful to pay attention to emergent trends. So, for example, the motivations of spending time together and having fun appear to be increasing. On the other hand, the desire to discover something new is actually trending downward, but for tourists. So overall, tourists are primarily drawn, of course, by the location, their travel itineraries. That hasn't really changed. But what is changing is what they're looking for once they're in the museum. You can go to the next slide. So to bring this all together, who's showing up really isn't changing, but what they want when they get there is. So across both local and tourists, we're seeing these shifts away from what can I do here, more towards how does this place make me feel? It's becoming more emotional and more experience driven through the connection with who they're showing up with and wanting to foster that sense of community. What's especially important nationally is that these things, like community and peace, they're growing organically. So this suggests that even small intentional investments in experiences that foster connection or a sense of calm or respite could actually accelerate trends that are already organically moving in that direction. And next slide. So one way to really make these findings actionable and concrete, of course, everyone here also is doing this already, but really to look at similar patterns within your own museum. So here at Art Bridges, the Learning Engagement team has an open resource called the Idea Center Online, where you can explore examples of funded programs that had specific audiences and a set of goals in mind. So if you're starting to notice trends in your own data, so maybe visitors are showing up for more connection or more relaxed, more components of relaxation. This is a great place to find inspiration by what your peers in the field are doing to tackle those specific needs. So it's a free resource, and the goal is to really help you think about how to expand or adapt your programming, your exhibitions, just really the general state of mind of how you want to align with what your audience data is telling you. And I want to emphasize again that it all really comes back to your specific context. So use these examples of what I discussed, or even use these examples of what your peers are doing through the Idea Center as examples of inspiration, but also tailor them to what's unique about your museum and your visitors. So next slide. Before I pass things back to Maria, I want to end with just a few practical takeaways that aren't always talked about. So first, whenever you're learning about your visitors, make sure that that information is shared across your teams and within your organization. So through programming, marketing, visitor services, all of these teams benefit from working from the same data-informed understanding. And just as importantly, this is also about creating a sense of buy-in for the people who are helping collect the data. That might look like sharing visitor callouts from open-ended responses, especially when someone is recognized or complimented. When people in COVES or whatever the ways you're collecting data, if you have those open-ended responses and people are saying, this was a great experience, I love this exhibition, this programming was incredible, I loved the people at guest services, tell them about it because really that creates that buy-in of wanting to keep the data collection going.
Mhm.
Also, simply communicating what you're learning. So again, people can feel like their efforts are contributing to something meaningful, and it's not just feeling like a routine work expectation. This is also a really great way and a really great opportunity for professional development because data collection, especially things like intercept surveys, which is COVES, but perhaps you're also doing a different intercept survey at your own museum, is a really unique skill set. Not many environments offer that kind of hands-on experience, so there's a lot of value in framing this work as training, whether that's for volunteers, docents, interns, or just other staff. So second, use your data to confidently say yes and no. Let it guide your decisions. If a proposed program or exhibition or marketing approach isn't aligning with what your visitors are telling you they want, your data gives you the autonomy and ability to pivot and adjust with confidence. And lastly, just to reiterate everything I've shared today, it's a national snapshot. So the goal isn't to generalize what I talked about to every museum, but really just to give you a reference point to better understand where your museum is uniquely positioned. And so with that, I'm going to pass it back to Maria, who's going to walk through how to apply, visualize, and filter all these great findings.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can't agree with Kim more when she says that share these findings across departments. Sharing this valuable data with stakeholders that are important and have a say in your museum helps build motivation around evaluation. It helps build evaluation capacity. And it just has people thinking about, okay, well, we want to make this decision. What does the data say? And does that back up our decision? So now, Kim has given you an overview into what that national COVES aggregate looks like. I'm going to help you apply these benchmarks to your own site-specific data. One way of doing this is figuring out what sort of data visualizations you have access to. And here we can go to the next slide. Um, if your site is collecting data independently, you'll probably have access to some raw data files on Excel. Your site also might even have its own data dashboard, which is even more great. Another way is through the data dashboard that COVES provides. And this is a benefit that COVES sites are able to see, view, and use after they've collected at least 100 surveys. So there are a lot of benefits when it comes to a data dashboard. Just looking at the image in the next slide real quick. You can see that the data here is super easy to view. It's easy to access. Dashboards also allow you to filter your data and make more meaningful comparisons, which I'll dive more into in just a second. And then dashboards are also super useful when it comes to sharing this data across departments. So multiple departments can be referencing visitor data. They can be kind of like playing in the data dashboard when they're making decisions to see, what the visitor data tells them. And for the next slide, I want to show an example of what a COVES dashboard looks like. This may not look exactly like yours. Each COVES dashboard is unique in its own way. It has different widgets and all these sorts of things. So this is just an example, but I just want to walk you through what a dashboard can look like. Steph, could you hit play, please? Okay, so we're starting out with some experience ratings. Diving into some more specifics on visitor experience, social connection and empathy ratings, so how people felt during their visit. Really important part here, motivations and visitor trends. And then as we scroll past, data on temporary exhibition. So who came to the temporary exhibition and at what rate? What did they think about it? Demographics relating to groups, both with adults and groups with children. And then at the very end, we have some really nice, valuable demographic info. You can see all those charts, some geographic location, all that. Okay. And now I want to show you a cool feature that the Coves dashboard has. It's an advanced filter. It's not necessarily anything like we're not reinventing the wheel here, but most people don't know that this is a feature that they can use. Um, yeah, you can see it at the ribbon at the very top of the dashboard, and we can go ahead and click play. See that advanced filter button. And then as I'm writing a label here to try to remind myself what I'm looking for. And then Steph, if you could just pause in one moment. There we go. Okay, so as you can see, just recapping here what happened visually, we clicked on that blue button that says insert new condition, and it opened up this really long and confusing list of things. Essentially, and just really basically, I want you all to think of each of these things as a survey question. So since we're looking at locals and tourists for this webinar, the the category that you should select is what you'll see on the screen here. So what says group, please tell us about your group, including yourself. And it looks really wonky because that's just how the question is worded on the survey. It finishes off with, so describing your group, is it locals only, tourists only, a mix of both, that sort of thing. Could we click play again real quick? And see, we selected that survey question to filter for, and here we're looking at all the answer options. So we're selecting locals, and now the dashboard is going to show you data only from local visitors. And these are self-identified locals. I saw that question in the chat. So for COES, when we're thinking about local and tourist audiences, these are all self-defined. So a visitor has to identify as a local or as a tourist to be able to filter, to do these filters like we just showed you. There's another way to get more granular. However, we're not going to get into that because that's just opening a whole box of worms. But you can dive into some of your zip code data and your raw data and get more detailed answers there. So. I also, before moving on to the next slide, I want to just say that this can be applied to all sorts of data on your dashboard. Right now, we showed you locals and how to filter for locals, but you can filter through different group demographics. So you can filter for group composition, like I had mentioned before, filtering for adults that are coming with children versus groups that only have adults coming in. You can filter through repeat visitors, who saw the temporary exhibitions, and then draw analyses based off of that. In order to understand how this can apply to your site, I'm going to use Crystal Bridges as an example. Um, let's look at the percentage of locals that visit Crystal Bridges. This will be the next slide. So as you can see, only 29% of Crystal Bridges visitors are locals only, compared to that 49% of tourists, which actually kind of differs from that aggregate data that Kim had shared beforehand, where Crystal Bridges is experiencing more tourists compared to locals when you're looking at the aggregate. Okay, so if we're able to filter for locals, like we just showed you how to use the advanced filters for, you'll be able to see that the local only responses for why did you visit the museum. So this is what brings us to the chart on the right. So it's specifically local visitor motivations. So what I'm seeing here is for Northwest Arkansas locals, spending time together as a group and relaxing were the top reasons why they came to Crystal Bridges. And we can also see that for fun or entertainment as a group, as well as to find peace, are near the top of the list as well. So what those percentages are telling me is that locals mainly came for social enjoyment, they came for relaxation, they came for recuperation. Um, with that being said, I also do want to show you another cool feature that dashboards have, and this is not just synonymous to Coves. Um, when we're talking about dashboard filtering, another thing that's really useful is filtering by dates, which is going to bring me to my next slide. So this chart is showing you Crystal Bridges' local motivations across time. So to give you a really brief summary, so 2023 is in the hot pink bars, 2024 is in the lavender, and then the dark purple represents 2025. And here are a few things that stand out to me. So, see how learning something new, this first category right here at the very top, how that rated much higher in 2023 compared to later years. That kind of makes me want to ask myself, why is that? Keep asking yourself why these numbers are fluctuating in the way that they are. Was there a changing programming? Was there a changing marketing in visitor engagement? Any sorts of things that might clue you into why those percentages fluctuated throughout the time? But on the flip side, we can see that 34% of locals in 2023 came to spend time with their family. So that third category represented right there. Um, and in 2024, 2025, that number increases slightly. So, so we're seeing the same thing with the other motivation category related to the social aspect of a person's visit. So, for example, if you're looking at for fun or entertainment as a group, that percentage also increases over time. So now you can start asking yourself, what was happening at my museum during each of these 3 years? Why are there fluctuations here? Is this something that has to do with programming? Are these high rates, and this is just talking about the site uniqueness, this is something that might be unique to Crystal Bridges, but are these high rates of relaxing and finding peace at Crystal Bridges due to the wide campus that Crystal Bridges has and how it's full of nature and art, and it's a great space to relax and to recuperate? So, asking yourself those questions can help you lead to different conclusions and help you make different decisions. And this is why at our bridges, I always like to emphasize that the more data, the better, especially when it covers a long period of time like this. Like, see, when you've been collecting data for the past 3 years, you get to have really nice charts like this, where you can look at your data and your visitors from a very bird's eye view and see what's different year to year. And when I'm talking about filtering by dates, here I showed you a really like big overview of year by year, but you can also filter by any dates. So for example, if you want to get to know more about people that are visiting during your spring break seasons, you can filter for those dates. If your area has a really high tourist season that's unique to other parts of the US, you can filter for those dates too. Same with like any citywide events, festivals, anything that might be happening that might affect your visitorship. you can filter for that and see how the people that are coming in might have been different from your general museum visitors. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Okay, so I think this is the last chart that we're going to show. So for this chart, we're comparing Crystal Bridge's local motivations to that entire Coves Art Bridges aggregate that Kim was sharing earlier. So like I had mentioned before, for Northwest Arkansas locals, spending time together as a group and relaxing were the top reasons why they came to Crystal Bridges. But for the aggregate, we're seeing that learning something new, and then deepening my areas of interest both have to do with learning and areas of interest, how those rated slightly higher than Crystal Bridges locals. So even though these percentages might seem slight, they start cluing you into how these audiences are different and they start cluing you into the nuance that all of your audiences have. So if you want to attract a specific audience, use your advanced filters and take a look at what's motivating them to come to your site and then make decisions based off of that. And it feels so much better having data backing your decisions rather than just a gut feeling, although I'm not against gut feelings. But yeah, it just helps justify decisions, planning, programming, all of that. And now, speaking about data-backed decisions, I want to go to the next slide to kind of apply that data to an actual practical example. So again, we consulted with our colleagues at Crystal Bridges, shout out to them, doing amazing work, and how they use their data relating to both locals and tourists. So one of the things that they found out was that by understanding the proportions of visitors that are coming from nearby states and visitors that are coming locally, Crystal Bridges was able to change their marketing and outreach strategies. So, by knowing who is coming in and from where, they were able to collaborate with the city's tourism organization on where and how to market the Crystal Bridges museum experience. Another thing is that the data helped them plan gallery closures and de-install timelines. Um, so, around busy times, especially like spring break, this just happened. Crystal Bridges paired their attendance numbers with COVES data to see when tourists were coming in for spring break and when locals were coming in for spring break. And then they were able to fit their de-install timeline to try to avoid those busy seasons. And COVES data also helped them realize that Crystal Bridges tourists usually don't choose to see temporary exhibition. That's not the main reason why they're coming in. But locals choose to see the temporary exhibitions at higher rates. So now knowing this, it affects how they make decisions and plan everything that has to do with temporary exhibitions, goal setting, what audiences they're trying to attract, and all of that. So I have been talking a whole lot. I know that I've seen some comments come in from the chat, but I do want to just wrap things up really quickly. To give everybody a really brief recap of what we talked about today. So, we provided some benchmarks and tools to help you answer those questions that you might have about your audience. Talking about coves, but this can also be applicable to sites that are generally collecting data. One thing that I really want people to take away from this webinar is that Coves is a great way to get to know the basics about your audience. And you might already know the basics because you're a Coves dashboard expert or you already dive into that raw data. But I wanted you to keep asking yourself, so what else do you want to know? So these questions may come from you, they may come from people at other departments and other team members. So I really just want everybody to keep asking themselves questions about your audiences and see what can be answered through Coves. And if something can't be answered through Coves, then maybe that's another way of thinking about, well, would another evaluation study with another method be better fit for this? So it helps you try to integrate evaluative thinking, integrating data into decisions when we're talking about sites. And then lastly, I just want to shout out our Heart Bridges evaluation website. It has a ton of resources. So we have a bunch of evaluation toolkits on there. We have the annual COVES reports on there, as well as a series of white papers that Kim wrote. Um, and where they use COVES data in their analysis. And we just dive a little bit deeper into some visitor motivations. I think one is it open-ended responses? And there's a third one, Kim, off the top of my head.
Um, Sorry, I am responding to people in the chat. So the white
It's okay.
papers. Yeah.
You're good.
Yeah, go ahead and
Um,
check it out. It's artbridges.org / evaluation. There's a lot of toolkits on there as well. I'm sure some of you have noticed the increasing trends or interest from maybe from your community or maybe within your leadership to start thinking about wellness programming in your museum. And so we also have a toolkit to navigate evaluation practices with that in mind. And we also have a very recent white paper on emergent trends across the field in common ways that people are actively programming with art and wellness in mind. So beyond utilizing COVES as a data set, we also have a lot of different resources that have a lot of touch points that you can use, again, as sources of inspiration, but also to anchor to really navigate the complexity and the nuances and uniqueness of your own museum. So I encourage you all to check it out.
yeah. And also feel free to reach out to us using our evaluation department email there on the slide. If you're interested in joining COVES, or if you're just interested in just talking about your COVES data, your data in general, feel free to shoot us an email and we can coordinate a time to talk to, even if we don't have solutions, evaluators always like bouncing ideas off of each other. So that's how we find the real meat of things. Okay. Thank you everybody for bearing with us. I'm going to just like scroll through this chat right now, see if there is anything else that needs answering.
And as Maria mentioned, and I also mentioned in the chat, but anyone who is currently collecting data, whether that be through codes or maybe your own homebrew of intercept surveys or programmatic surveys, we are always here as a function of support in any capacity and way that we can. And so I really want to emphasize the open doorness of our team. So please feel free and feel comfortable to reach out to that evaluation email. We would really love to start a dialogue with you to help navigate your own data, whether that be their interpretation or if you want statistical support. I would love to be able to, as someone mentioned in the chat, provide workshops or even getting more granular in your own data to understand and be able to answer specific questions that you or your leadership team may have. So please feel free to reach out at any time.
Absolutely.
And
Okay.
someone is asking to see that last slide. Awesome. Thank you so much.
Okay, I'm seeing a question here about, let's see. Oh, I lost it. Okay, from Addison. So, how do you ensure that data is being collected regularly, and how does that affect your data? Usually, when I give my report, I just mentioned that there were downtimes in gathering data. So, this is something that we tackle in the COVES training for data collection. Usually, COVES is more rigorous and methodological because we're not only collecting data at your site, but we're collecting data nationally. So we like to stick to some parameters and frameworks just to make sure that everybody's doing the same process so that we're comparing apples to apples essentially when we're looking at the data. Um, so we dive more into that. One thing that we just recommend is not scheduling data collection shifts on the same days at the same times. So making sure that it's varying between like weekdays, weekends, mon or mornings and evenings. So having that variation there will allow you to capture multiple types of visitor experience. For example, a person that's coming in Wednesday morning isn't necessarily going to be the same person that's coming in Friday night. So yeah, just trying to make it as standardized as possible, but also randomizing those data collection shifts will help put more, like back your data up more. Okay, I'm also seeing Jay asking about how Cove's trends support or diverge from trends captured by AAM's Susie Wilkening study, especially over time. I I always like using Susie's data and studies. I think that when thinking and comparing between the Susie Wilkening study and COVES, they're getting at the same thing, but there's slight differences here that I feel like don't allow us to make the same comparisons that we can make within coves. For example, and this is just me off the top of my head, but I know that coves, we have a standardized survey instrument, where usually all of the sites have the same questions and everything, whereas Susie Wilkening's can vary year by year depending on the theme that they're pursuing. And somebody please correct me if I'm wrong on that.
I would I would also like
But
to interject that someone in the chat clarified, thank you so much, but COVES is an intercept survey. And so you're getting direct
yes.
visitor feedback immediately after they've already walked the galleries. And so the data that is being collected via Suzy is not an intercept survey per se. So it's more so a tool of reflection and trying to understand a general visitor experience, whereas codes, you get that direct feedback from the very people that are at your institution. So to what Maria just said, it's getting at the plane is going to the same destination, but the
Exactly. Mhm.
utility of using these things allows for a different kind of dialogue.
Mhm. Karen, I see you raised your hand. I don't know how this works for the webinar. Sorry. One second.
I see, while you navigate that, Maria, I see Jacqueline asked if COVES is something existing cohort institutions have access to. So if your institution is actively not collecting COVES or is not a member of COVES at the moment, feel free to email us. The the opportunities to become a COVES member pretty vast, and so reach out at any time. Even if you are a COVES member, but you are not a COVES member through Art Bridges, feel free to reach out to us because we are still providing levels of support for the COVES instrument.
Hmm. Okay. Awesome. Thank you,
Oh,
Bria.
also to Jay's point, yeah. So the nice thing about you mentioned it's not apples to apples. But the trends are pretty similar, and so that's also a level of confidence on the generalizability of what we're finding from visitor surveys. So whether it's intercept, whether it's a reflection survey, whether it's open dialogue, these trends are pretty consistent, and so that's also why we tend to have we're a champion and proponent of you looking at the granularity of your own data because the general trends are pretty similar regardless of the instrument. And so really trying to have that magnifying lens on your own institution.
Mhm. I know that we're almost at time. Karen, I'm so sorry. I can't figure out how to unmute you in any way. Interesting. Okay.
So I want to give the almost the final countdown a little bit that we are at the
Yeah.
final minute.
Yeah.
Um, so thank you all so much for joining. I really had a great time talking about the data. Again, reach out at any point. I'm going to pass it to Maria for any final thoughts and reflections.
Absolutely. Just thank you all so much for joining. Thank you all for engaging. Thank you so much for that. It was so lovely to talk to you all and just show you what is possible with codes and what's possible with data in general. If we didn't get to your question in the chat, please feel free to email us through that evaluation at our Bridges email. We'll be more than happy to either keep emailing or have a meeting and bounce ideas back and forth. So
Okay.
awesome. Thank you so
Thanks,
much, everybody.
everyone.